Why do you want them to listen to your podcast?
So that when they think about starting a business, they've got the content that is pointing them in the right direction.
That is such a valuable piece of advice there.
The change in mindset makes a massive difference.
Welcome to Aussie Lawn Star.
Welcome back for round 2, Steve.
Cheers, mate.
Now, we covered lots and lots of topics in that first half hour, but I was thinking it'd be nice to talk about some of the deeper topics we can get into. One of them particularly is the types of equipment we use. There's pretty much every piece of equipment we use has some sort of safety features built into it.
Yep, and that's great because the manufacturers they have to consider safety when they design something and produce it. So, and we as employers and even as workers ourselves, if we're a sole trader working solo, we have an obligation to make sure that we don't tamper with those they're controls. They're an engineering control.
Yeah.
So we're not supposed to take off any of those guards or mess around with any of that safety equipment. And that's in the legislation. It's also in the Australian standards around the design of those products as well. So, and I remember having a conversation in LMCA about this very topic because it's the old guard no guard.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, if something did happen and you ended up in court and you had removed a safety guard from a piece of equipment, then you would be liable, and that's where it would get really bad in court.
Yeah, and let's be fair, the safety guard on a whippersnipper is often not so much about human safety. It's often about the design of the whippersnipper and about the load on the motor and the various different things like that. So there's good arguments as to why that might not be considered a safety guard for the user or people that are like pedestrians in the area. But at the same time, because it is a safety guard, if you are working in a commercial application, which all of us getting paid for work, it is a commercial application one way or another, and something goes wrong.
Yeah, and look, and I don't disagree. That they're probably not doing a great deal of protection. But like you say, it comes down to it is a breach of legislation to be removing something that is designed for safety purposes. I guess it will also, from memory, the conversation went around what they called it in the owner's manual. So if they refer to it as a safety guard, then you don't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah. So by comparison, if you look at some other tools or some other design features of tools even, because even on a whippersnipper this will be true, some brands will have a dead man switch on a whippersnipper or a chainsaw or a hedge trimmer. Now, I've got a hedge trimmer that's got 2 dead man switches on it, so each hand has to be gripping the lever, the operating hand with the throttle has to have a dead man switch operated before you can operate the throttle, and then the other hand has to operate a dead man switch before the machine will run.
Yep.
But other hedge trimmers that I've got might have 0 dead man switches built into it or any sort of safety switches built into the operation of it. So you can literally pick it up and accidentally pull the trigger and away it goes.
Yeah, and I guess the difference between petrol and battery, we're seeing a lot of differences there. So with a petrol machine, the engine's always running, and so I would say there's a lot more need to have those dead man switches on there because it's going to straight away be running. The good thing about battery equipment is that once you release the trigger, it's going to within moments shuts down.
Yeah. One of the ones that I see come up quite regularly, there's a lot of blowers particularly that don't have a kill switch at all. So battery powered blowers, they don't have a off function other than letting go of the throttle. So you can bump the throttle or the cruise control button and all of a sudden that thing's going flat out. And there's nothing stopping that from happening. And I mean, a blower's pretty safe tool. It doesn't have a lot of risks, but it could blow dust in someone's face or rocks or anything.
Yeah, well, I was interesting. I was watching Nathan the other day testing the Echo blower, and he was blowing bricks. That's how powerful they become, is that they can move bricks. So if you think about it, if there's a little piece of metal, a little bit of wire or something like that, it can very easily pick that up and shoot that into somebody's leg or their eye or that sort of thing. So it just comes down to how likely that is. And again, it's not very likely, depending on the type of job you're on.
Now, the other one that I think is really interesting, like my hedge trimmer that has a two-handed dead man switch built into it, chainsaws usually have a two-handed operational requirement that also has those safeties built into them. And a common fallacy is to call a top-handle saw a single-handed saw.
Yeah, and so that's really about the designer and the supplier or manufacturer actually providing something that meets the legislation and the Australian standards. So they have to be comfortable that they've done everything that they can to prevent an injury. If heaven forbid something did happen with those pieces of equipment that don't have the same level of cut-off switches, then it may come back to the manufacturer that they have to redesign, and they might even have to do a recall.
Yeah, and I don't mind throwing myself under the bus with that one. With my chainsaw injury, I was operating a top-handled chainsaw. I broke every rule in the book when I cut myself with that, so I was up a ladder. That I'm pretty sure it is not okay to operate a chainsaw up a ladder under any circumstances.
If you're talking about actually on the ladder, like on the rungs, as opposed to a work platform at the top, like I would absolutely never. You should never do any work on the rungs of a ladder. You should always have one of those platform ladders and work on the top with a rail around the top of it.
Yeah, so if you don't have that and you're using a chainsaw on the rungs of a ladder, it's a bit of a no-no. So I was doing that. I was using my non-dominant hand to hold the chainsaw. I was holding a very flicky branch with my other hand.
And I'm sure we've all been there, Gary.
I'm admitting it. I'm throwing myself under the bus. I did everything wrong there, and I paid the price.
Yeah, and that's the reason why they have a lot of these safety cutoffs and guards and things in place, is because they know that people are going to do these types of things.
Yeah,
and they still, even though the manufacturer may not be operating the machine and you may not be their employee, they still have that obligation to provide safe equipment for us to use.
Yeah. So given that I came from a workers' compensation case manager background, got a few reasons to think twice about how I operate, and running a business that's set up as a company and a family trust with the workers' comp policy, all these things I've done to make sure I'm above board. There's a lot of businesses in our industry that are probably cutting a few more corners than I am.
Oh, look, I wouldn't doubt it. It comes down to that perceived pressure about understanding of safety. There's just so many reasons why people might cut those corners. And we've all been there. You're racing the sun. You want to get that hedge trimmed before you run out of sunlight. You don't have to come back in the morning for 15, 20 minutes of work. So you feel that pressure to get it done, and you might cut those corners. And that's where you're more likely to have an injury, is when you start rushing under pressure.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's what it comes down to often, is going, well, I wouldn't normally do this, but I'm going to cut this corner for this reason.
Yep. Yeah. And I find, particularly working on ladders, doing hedges and pruning branches, cutting branches off of trees, that's that's the time you're going to run into trouble when you're rushing, because you're going to go, I don't want to readjust the height of the work platform ladder. I'm just going to stand one rung from the top and work from there.
Yeah. The other injury, which I think is unfortunately too common, is the hedge trimmer, where somebody's used to using a hedge trimmer that's on a short pole, and then they go to a hedge trimmer that's not on a pole and they grab the bar of the blade instead of the handle.
Yeah. And you know, they do protect them as much as they can when they design them. But again, it comes down to it's about practicality, you know. And I think from the cases I've seen where somebody has injured themselves on a hedge trimmer where they've touched the blades, it's been a case of either rushing or just not thinking. So, like I say, they're used to using a pole extension tool rather than, you know, the handheld item. So again, this is where taking a few minutes just to think before you start a job, you know, it's risk management. You've got to stop, think, all right, what could go wrong? What can I do to stop it? And that's always been my approach. Is to just take a couple of minutes before you start a job to just take a breath, think, and then do, because that pause is often enough to go, yeah, I'm not going to grab that by that part.
Well, the other ones that come up quite often is the excuse. I will make an allowance for this because I'm smarter than that.
Yeah. I've always loved those. So I've worked in higher education for a number of years in work health and safety roles, and people think because they've got a PhD in something amazing that they're smarter than the equipment or whatever. And a lot of the time they actually put more effort and more time into bypassing safety and taking bigger risks than if they just went and did the job properly.
Yeah. A common one I've seen, and I'm guilty, haven't had an injury, but I'm guilty of going, well, I wouldn't let my employee do this. But I know the risk. So really common is lawnmowers. If you are operating a lawnmower and you're like, well, I won't switch the lawnmower off while I empty the catcher.
Yeah, and clear the blockage.
And let's face it, the manufacturers are actually designing lawnmowers these days so that they have a safety built in to disable the blades once you let go of the handlebar or whatever the case is. So from a lot of points of view, you go, well, it is safe to unblock that because the blades have been disabled. But also there's that little sticker right beside the blades that says, don't put your hand in here when the motor's on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A lot of people have been asking about which brand of battery tool to buy, and I don't like to recommend one brand of battery for everyone or every situation. Dealer support and access to parts and service all play a big role in that decision. Some brands have better tools for specific needs or each product category. I've been using a variety of brands, and I endeavour to provide unbiased interviews on Aussie Lawn Stars with as many of those product brands as possible. I reached out to Ego Power Plus through the podcast because of how Barry supports the industry and Ego owners. Barry has impressed me with his loyalty to customers in providing support and listening to the needs of the industry, which has resulted in a full lineup of new commercial tools landing in Australia over the last 12 months that has positioned Ego as a leader in the commercial tool space for outdoor power equipment. Visit egopowerplus.com.au to see if they have the tools you need today.
And I think, again, referring to batteries kind of, if you're working with battery and petrol equipment and you're changing between the two, I think that's where people get into a false sense of security, because when you release on the grip on the electric mower, the blades will stop spinning. When you and even like when you get off of, unless you've been dodgy and disabled the operator sensor switch, when you get off of a zero turn or a ride on or a stander, that should make the blades cut off as well. So, and it's like the old safety vest. People think because they're wearing a safety vest they're seen, and they'll walk in front of an aircraft, a bus, a truck, whatever. And so the more safety features that we get in our equipment, if we go back and use older equipment, it's that same false sense of security. We need to treat each piece of equipment, each job, as a new piece of equipment or a new job. Just stop and take that moment to think and go, okay, what could I do to injure myself here? And sometimes there is equipment failure, and sometimes it's stupidity, basically. We talk about people being smart, but a lot of these things people put down to making a dumb decision.
Yep. Yeah, I think the safety vest is a requirement when you're on a work site where there are vehicles.
Yeah.
So if you're doing roadside loading and unloading on a residential property, you might not think twice about it. I know a lot of people don't wear high vis. And it's like, well, what's the risk? I'm working in somebody's backyard, but you're loading and unloading on the road and off the road.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the hazards I've identified in the swims that I've done is, you're working close to the road or on the road. You're loading equipment in and out, getting in and out of the ute or truck, or van. It is a risk. But the other thing is, people, I think, and I'm not going to be popular for saying this, but people are getting used to high vis because so many people wear it now.
Yeah, true. And this is why I raised this issue, because whilst you're doing a residential property, you can get away with it. Nobody's going to blink if you don't wear high vis, and probably never going to have a problem. But the problem is that it's that probably. So the probability of when it does go wrong and you didn't have high vis on.
Yeah.
But to escalate it even one step further, if you are doing roadside work for a tender, for council, for construction site, anything like that, the requirement to have traffic control is a legal requirement. It's not an option.
Yep. Yeah. So they start off with requiring a traffic management plan, and that plan will often require that there is traffic control. So again, it's easiest to leave that to the professionals, and that way you guys get on with doing what you're doing. But totally agree. It is, and I've seen this with so many people who are working for councils doing nature strips. They, especially if they're working on a busy road, unless you're working a back road in the middle of the night, which brings a whole range of other challenges from a safety perspective. You're going to see a lot of vehicles, and the more vehicles, the higher the chance that someone's going to hit you.
Yes. So when I was doing mostly residential work, I started carrying safety cones that you might see council using, all those sorts of areas. The decent size safety cones, they get the attention of a vehicle driving past. And I would put out 2 or 3 cones behind my trailer before I would unload my mower.
Yep.
And I would only do that on areas where the road was quite busy or there was not a lot of room for loading and unloading, because I considered that to be high risk. But I was still doing it, and I'd actually put 3M high vis tape on the back of my trailer so that it was even more visible at that point in time.
Yep.
But the requirements there might be considered sketchy if you're doing residential work, but certainly if something goes wrong and you haven't done anything, then it goes back on you.
The other thing I like to think about when we're talking about putting safety cones out for your trailer ramp is, how many times have we seen people complaining that someone's come and parked right behind the trailer and you can't get your equipment back in? So a little trick I used to do was I had 4 cones, and I'd put 2 at the sides of my ramp for the trailer, so no one tripped over them.
Yeah.
And trust me, I've actually seen a pedestrian nearly did trip over.
Yeah.
Even with the cone there, too busy looking at their phone.
Yep.
And then I would put another 2 cones far enough back for me to be able to get my mower in and load in on the ramp. So
Yeah.
people won't always respect that.
No.
But
I've had that.
yeah, but it's a handy little thing that I've always found useful.
I've found in high traffic areas they will park in behind your cones, and then when you point out that you need to load your mower, they start yelling at you.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, you are doing the best you can, and so the legislation, work health and safety legislation, uses the term reasonably practicable, and that's fancy lawyer talk for what would a reasonable person do that isn't going to be overly expensive in comparison with the risk.
Yeah.
So putting cones out for safety, for getting your mower on and off your trailer or in and out of your van, that is reasonably practicable. How frequently is someone going to come and park in that spot and not allow you to be able to move in your mower? Depends on where you work.
Yeah.
I haven't had it happen, but I'm in Little Wagga with a population of 60, 70,000 as opposed to being in a big city where parking's a premium. So yeah, and I guess that's another thing to think about is aggression. So you're saying that the person starts yelling at you.
Yeah.
When you're working in an environment where you think that's going to happen, have you included that in your risk management? Have you gone, okay, what happens if somebody starts yelling and assaults me or one of my workers?
Yeah.
Have you got a way for them to keep in contact with you? So if you've got an offsider goes out and runs the second vehicle for you, or you're out the back, you got your earmuffs on and happily sitting there on your zero turn, having a great time out in the backyard, how long could that offsider be out the front, laid out on the ground in their own blood because someone's decked them because they told them off for parking there?
And let's face it, if you've got an offsider, chances are you're sitting on the zero turn while they're doing all of the physical work.
Absolutely. That's good risk management.
So this raises a real issue, though. And I've seen this come up on when it comes to larger companies and, the more commercial construction sites. This is laid out really black and white. If you, and it doesn't matter who you are, if you see something happening unsafe and you don't do something about it, then you can be held liable.
That's correct. Yeah. So we all have a few responsibilities under the Work Health and Safety Act, and that is to make sure that we keep ourselves safe.
Yep.
That we keep everybody else that's in the workplace safe. So that's even visitors, members of the public who walk through, other contractors that might be on the site. And we also need to follow reasonable instructions given to us by our employer.
Yeah.
Or in the case of having a contract with maybe a construction company and we're out on their site, we need to follow reasonable instructions they give us as well. So that, if you see something's wrong, something that could go wrong and you don't report it, how bad are you going to feel when somebody actually injures themselves?
Well, it's not just that you're going to feel bad, you're likely to get prosecuted.
Oh, yeah.
Because when a significant injury happens and that gets investigated, they don't hold back if they believe there are multiple people that should be held liable for preventing that from happening.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the law is quite rigid, as it needs to be. I agree with you. I have a very people focused approach to safety, so I tend not to focus so much on the punishment or ending up in court. I like to think about the people.
Yeah.
So hence why I took the approach that I did in that situation. But yeah, look, I totally agree. If you don't report it, there is that possibility that if someone knows that you have seen something that could go wrong and you haven't done something about it, then yes, you could end up in court over it.
Yeah. Well, if we take this to a practical level, because I know it sounds scary to say you could end up in court for something negligence because you didn't report something, but the practicality of this is the people listening to this podcast, are likely to be running a business or thinking about running a business, and these are the sorts of things they need to think about. So on that note, I suggest people think about how they protect themselves, but also I've found this to be true. When you put on an employee, don't assume one thing when it comes to safety. You have to make sure, and this is why we have workers' comp and why we have work health safety policies and why we have SWIMS documents, right? We need to provide each employee with adequate training so that they know what safeties are there to protect them and that they know they need to use them. Because it's not common sense, and the amount of times employees will not use the safeties that are there for their protection or for other people's protection. It's just, if you don't say it and you don't spell it out and you don't train them, then you got a problem.
Yes, and that's one of our duties under the Work Health and Safety Act, is to make sure that we provide safe systems of work, safe equipment, that we're maintaining equipment in a safe way. We do have an obligation to keep our people safe, and thinking about also that, as much as I as much as I don't like to think about the punitive side of it, if you've got a small business and you get hit with a fine from Safe Work for breaching the work health and safety legislation, we're talking for a business, tens of thousands. For an individual, it's in the thousands.
Yeah.
So that's enough to cripple a small business.
And I think if things go seriously wrong, then it goes up from there. That's
right, yeah. And, you're looking at if it was something like industrial manslaughter, so something that you as an employer, you knew that there was a problem and it could be proven that you knew there was a problem and you didn't act on it and somebody dies, you're talking millions of dollars and 25 years in jail.
Yeah. So
that's the scary stuff anyway.
Let's take another break and then let's talk a bit more about training, because I think that's worthwhile to talk about training for ourselves, but also for employees. Are you thinking of leaving your job to start a profitable and enjoyable lawn and garden business? Aussie Lawn Stars shares stories, lessons, and advice to help you grow a healthy, productive, efficient, and sustainable business. Got questions or want more information? Contact Aussie Lawn Stars at iCloud.com or reach out to Gary Ashton on Facebook or Messenger for personal help. But beware, your question may end up in a podcast episode. For business coaching that ensures the right mindset and decision-making approach, check out Think Tank Coaching. Their website is https://thinktankcoaching.com.au. They've been instrumental in helping me and can guide you towards achieving your business goals. You can also email them at thinktankcoaching@outlook.com. Need to set up best practices for bookkeeping, accounting, and business structure? Contact Adrian from Prosper Financial at 02 4977 3363. And don't forget to join Lawn Mowing Contractors Australia and Australian Professional Lawn Contractors Facebook groups. Great supportive communities focused on our industry.
Thank you for listening to Aussie Lawn Stars. Please remember to rate and review the show on the Apple Podcasts app or the player you use. Exciting new shows are released every Monday. Make sure you follow or subscribe to hear the next episode.